my husband told me he was leaving me right after I cleared his family's debt. His Momo smirked and said, "We never liked you anyway." But they had no idea what I was planning next before starting the story from the beginning. I would like to ask you to like and subscribe to our channel so you can receive all our videos about revenge by empowered women. I remember the day Ted and I sat down at our old creaky kitchen table, strewn with bills and bank statements. "We can make this work, Mary," Ted said, squeezing my hand as we pored over the numbers. The desperation in his voice was palpable, almost as tangible as the cold sweat on his brow. We had decided to drain our savings, sell my grandmother's antique jewelry, and even take out loans. All this just to bail out his family's business. The sacrifices felt monumental, like we were standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump, hoping our parachute was made of more than just good intentions. The strain started to show almost immediately. Ted grew more distant, his smiles more forced. Our evenings, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now dissolved into silent meals and nights spent in separate rooms. I sold my car and took up extra shifts at the diner, coming home to the faint scent of Ted's cologne, a reminder of the widening gap between us. It wasn't just our bank account that was emptying. It was our reservoir of mutual joy and hope. One particularly grueling day, I came home to find Ted at the kitchen table again, his head in his hands. "It's not enough," he murmured. I pulled up a chair, my legs heavy with exhaustion, both physical and emotional. We were stuck in a loop of sacrifice with no end in sight. The more we gave, the more his family seemed to need. The burden of keeping his family afloat was becoming our anchor, dragging us down into depths I never imagined we'd reach. Despite the chaos, I believed in us. I believed in Ted. We had made vows, after all, to stick together for better or worse. But as the months wore on, the weight of our financial woes began to erode that foundation. Ted's once warm eyes now often glazed over with a cold determination, fixated on numbers that never seemed to add up in our favor. We were fighting a losing battle, but I was determined not to let it break us. I clung to the hope that if we could just get through this storm, we'd emerge stronger, more united. So, I tightened our belts further, sold more of what little we had left, and watched as our living room became barer, our lives stripped down to the bare essentials. The reality was harsh and cold, like the wind that howled outside our increasingly empty home. We were sacrificing not just our present comforts, but potentially our future together. Yet, through it all, I held onto Ted's hand, even when his grip started to loosen. In those moments, I whispered words of encouragement, believing that love could somehow fill the voids that money had left behind. As I look back now, I see a woman who was fighting not just for her husband's family, but for her own sense of partnership and loyalty. It was a battle of heart versus hardship, a test of whether our bond could withstand the tremors of financial instability. And in those darkest hours, I chose us. I chose to believe that we could weather any storm. But as I was soon to find out, not all storms come with warning, and not all battles are meant to be won. The day Ted walked out, the sky was a blanket of gray, mirroring the turmoil inside our once cheerful home. It was a Tuesday, mundane in every way except for the catastrophe that unfolded with the swiftness of a thunderclap. I remember standing in the doorway, a half-made cup of coffee in hand, as Ted packed his suitcase with mechanical precision. Each fold of his shirts, each placement of his socks, felt like a tightening noose around the life we had built together. "Where are you going?" My voice was a whisper, choked by disbelief. Ted didn't look up from his suitcase. "I can't do this anymore, Mary. The pressure, the debts, it's too much. I'm suffocated," he said, his voice steady, too steady. It was as if the man I had loved had been replaced by a stranger, one who wore Ted's face but lacked his warmth. The clink of his suitcase snapping shut was like a judge's gavel, sentencing me to a sudden, unwanted solitude. You're just going to leave? After everything we've sacrificed? I asked, my voice gaining strength from the anger bubbling within. But Ted avoided my gaze, his eyes fixed on some unseen horizon beyond our life together. He walked past me, his steps echoing hollowly on the wooden floor. At the threshold, he paused, and for a moment, I thought he might turn back, say it was all a terrible mistake. But he simply muttered, "I'm sorry, Mary," and stepped out into the cold air, leaving me framed in the doorway, a portrait of betrayal. The following days were a blur of sleepless nights and aimless days. The silence of the house was suffocating, each room whispering memories of a life that was no longer mine. I wandered through our home, touching objects that Ted had touched, half expecting them to carry some trace of his reasoning, some clue as to why he had decided to abandon not just me, but the vows we had promised to uphold. I tried calling him, each dial tone a pulse of hope that he might answer and make things right. But all I got was the cold, impersonal voicemail, mocking me with its invitation to leave a message after the beep. I left countless messages, each more desperate than the last, begging him to come home, to explain why, to give us a chance to mend what had been broken. But as days turned into weeks, the reality of my solitude cemented itself into my existence. The man I had sacrificed everything for had left me in the ruins of our shared dreams. And with his departure, the floodgates of questions opened. Why wasn't I enough to fight for? What had I done to drive him away? The weight of these unanswerable questions pressed down on me, threatening to drown me in a sea of self-doubt and despair. In my darkest hour, I realized that Ted's departure wasn't just a physical leaving. It was an emotional cleaving. He had taken not just his belongings, but a piece of my heart, leaving a void where confidence and love once resided. And yet, amid the shards of my shattered expectations, a flicker of anger began to ignite within me. It was a small flame at first, fueled by each unanswered call, each empty night. But as the days passed, that flame grew into a fire that began to burn away the debris of my disillusionment, revealing a determination I hadn't known I possessed. This fire, this burning resolve, was what led me to the next chapter in my journey. One that started with a single, chilling phone call to the person I thought could explain Ted's actions. His mother. I remember dialing the number with trembling fingers, the phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand. When Ted's mother, Helen, answered, her voice was cool, detached, like the crisp autumn air that seeped through my windows, uncaring and aloof. "Mary, what a surprise," she said, her tone laced with something that sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. "Helen, I need to understand why Ted left. I thought if anyone knew, it would be you." My voice was firm, trying to mask the quiver that threatened to betray my desperation. There was a pause, a silence that stretched between us like a chasm. Then, with a cold laugh that sent shivers down my spine, she replied, "Oh, Mary, you really don't get it, do you?" Her words were like a slap, stark and stinging. "What do you mean?" I pressed, my grip on the phone tightening. "Ted was never going to stay, dear. We never really thought you were right for him. All this, your little financial adventures, were just too much for Ted. He's not cut out for your kind of struggle." Her voice was dismissive, as if she was talking about a minor inconvenience rather than my shattered life. The conversation spiraled from there. Helen's words became crueler, each one a dagger aimed straight at my heart. She spoke of Ted as if he were a prize I was lucky to have briefly won, and of me as an unworthy contender who had overstayed her welcome. "He's better off without you, Mary. We all are," she concluded, her voice cold as ice. I hung up the phone, the buzzing silence in my ears mirroring the numbness spreading through my body. The woman I had tried to win over as a mother had just laughed off my heartbreak, had confirmed what I feared most, that I had never been truly accepted, that I was always an outsider in Ted's world. But as the initial shock waned, A fiery resolve took root within me. Helen's disdain, her cold dismissal of my pain, it didn't weaken me. Instead, it catalyzed something fierce and powerful within my soul. If they thought I was a mere obstacle to be discarded, they were gravely mistaken. I was not just some damsel in distress. I was a force to be reckoned with. This newfound resolve pushed me to look beyond my grief, to question not just why Ted had left, but how. How had he managed to leave so seamlessly, without the messiness that financial entanglements usually entail? My curiosity turned into determination, driving me to sift through our financial records, to trace the paths of our shared sacrifices. And it was in this search that I stumbled upon a trail of deceit so elaborate it chilled me to the bone. Sud's discovery of Ted's secret financial maneuvers was like finding the missing piece of a painful puzzle. Each transaction, each withdrawal he had made without my knowledge, was a breadcrumb leading me deeper into a forest of lies. A forest I was now determined to navigate with my eyes wide open. The realization that my marriage had been a facade fueled by deceit transformed my sorrow into a seething rage. It surged through me, a storm of emotions so intense it was almost palpable. I was no longer just a woman scorned. I was a woman ignited, fueled by the betrayal that had seeped into every corner of my life. I spent nights pacing the floors of our now too quiet home, each step echoing the rhythm of my racing heart. The walls, once silent witnesses to our shared laughter, now reverberated with the sound of my resolve. I wasn't going to be the victim of this story. I refused to let that be my narrative. With each revelation of Ted's deceit, my fury built, stacking like the precarious piles of financial statements on our kitchen table. These documents were no longer just paper. They were evidence of the lies that had underpinned our lives together. As I dug deeper, the pieces began to form a picture I could hardly believe. One that showed the man I loved as little more than a stranger. This anger was different from any emotion I had felt before. It was sharper, more focused. It didn't blur my thoughts. It clarified them, honing my senses and tightening my will. I began to see the world through a lens of acute determination, where every action, every decision, was a step towards uncovering the full extent of the betrayal. I transformed my rage into a tool. Instead of allowing it to consume me, I used it to propel my search for truth. It led me to scrutinize every transaction, every late-night phone call Ted had made, every mysterious appointment he had scribbled in his planner. Nothing was insignificant in the landscape of lies I was mapping out. This journey through my anger also reshaped me. I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. The meek, accommodating Mary, who had once tread carefully around Ted's moods and desires, was gone. In her place was someone fiercer, more assertive, someone who demanded answers and refused to be placated by half-truths. It was in this state of fierce transformation that I came across the most damning evidence yet, buried in a file of bank statements. Was a series of transfers so regular, so deliberate, that they couldn't be anything but intentional. Ted had been funneling money to a separate account long before he walked out on me. This discovery was the last piece of my shattered heart turning stone cold. The man I had loved, had sacrificed for, had planned his escape long before he had the courage to tell me. His cowardice was laid bare by his meticulously kept financial tracks that led to truths I could no longer ignore. Fueled by this rage, I vowed to uncover every secret, every lie. And as I pieced together the puzzle of our ruined marriage, I uncovered more than just financial infidelity. There were deeper, darker secrets that Ted and his family had buried, secrets that I was now determined to bring to light. The deeper I delved into Ted's financial records, the clearer the deception became. My nights were consumed with poring over bank statements and credit card receipts, each one a breadcrumb on the trail of betrayal. I felt like a detective in my own life's mystery, uncovering clues that Ted had never intended for me to find. It started with small, almost insignificant withdrawals that I had overlooked in the past. These amounts had slowly escalated, aligning suspiciously with Ted's increasing detachment. As I lined up the dates, a pattern emerged, one of premeditated siphoning of our joint funds. The numbers didn't just suggest spontaneous theft. They screamed of a long-planned exit. Each discovery twisted the knife a little deeper. How could the man I loved, the man I trusted with my heart and my future, deceive me so thoroughly? With each new revelation, the picture of the man I thought I knew faded further, replaced by a stranger with calculated motives. I traced the transfers back to an account I didn't recognize, one that was only in Ted's name. The bank statements for this account were a ledger of duplicity. Payments to unfamiliar names, large purchases in cities I'd never visited with him, and most damning of all, consistent payments to a real estate company in a town 2 hours away. The reality of these transactions was a cold shower to my denial. This wasn't just financial infidelity. This was a whole second life, a life funded by the money we were supposed to be saving, by the sacrifices we were making together. My hands trembled as I held the documents, the paper crisp and accusing, the numbers stark and unforgiving. As I continued to sift through the morass of deceit, a different image of Ted formed. This Ted was a master of manipulation, using our marriage as a facade while setting up his escape route. Each transaction was a brick in the wall he had been building between us, each lie a nail in the coffin of our relationship. But it wasn't just about the money or the betrayal. It was the systematic dismantling of my trust, my security, and our shared dreams. The realization that I had been living a lie was devastating. It shattered any remaining illusions of reconciliation or redemption for Ted. This cascade of truths was not just an unveiling of his deceit, but also a revelation of my own naivety. I had trusted blindly, loved completely, and it had been used against me in the most calculating way. Yet, as painful as each discovery was, it steeled my resolve to uncover everything, to understand the full extent of Ted's deception. With each document, each hidden transaction, my determination grew. I was no longer just uncovering a series of lies. I was uncovering a web of corruption that extended beyond Ted, reaching into the darkest corners of his family's dealings. This journey through the paperwork of our past was not just a search for evidence. It was a reclamation of my autonomy, a reassertion of my worth. And it was this journey that led me to the most shocking truths yet. Secrets that Ted and his family had buried deep. Secrets about past frauds, and even a suspicious death in the family. The unraveling of Ted's meticulously crafted lies was just the beginning. As I dug deeper, the skeletons in his family's closet began to clatter loudly, demanding attention. It wasn't just about hidden accounts or secretive transactions. Anymore, I was peeling back layers of a long-established facade of respectability that Ted's family had upheld in public. One chilly autumn evening, as I sat surrounded by piles of documents and old photographs, I stumbled upon something chilling. Papers, related to a family business that had been dissolved under mysterious circumstances. There were legal documents, hastily settled lawsuits, and hushed-up police reports. Each piece seemed innocuous on its own, but together, they sketched a portrait of deception and corruption that stretched back decades. I found old business partnerships that had ended in legal battles, where Ted's family had miraculously come out unscathed, their fortunes intact while their partners suffered ruin. There were property deeds for land purchased under dubious circumstances, and insurance claims that were settled for astonishing sums. It became clear that Ted's departure was not an anomaly. It was a continuation of a family tradition of self-preservation, at any cost. But the most harrowing discovery was related to the suspicious death of Ted's uncle, a man who had once been poised to take over the family empire. The official story had been a tragic accident, but the documents I found suggested otherwise. There were inconsistencies in the autopsy report, hushed conversations recorded in old diaries, and financial incentives that painted a sinister picture. This revelation shook me to my core. The implications were grave, and the potential danger to myself became suddenly very real. However, the more I uncovered, the more I felt an unyielding need to expose the truth, not just for my own vindication, but for those who had suffered silently under the tyranny of Ted's family's machinations. Equipped with a growing dossier of damning evidence, I knew I needed help. This was bigger than a simple divorce case. It was about bringing down a corrupt dynasty. I reached out to a private investigator, someone with the expertise to navigate the treacherous waters I had found myself in. Together, we began to piece together the puzzle, connecting dots that Ted and his family had hoped would remain forever disjointed. As our investigation deepened, we uncovered offshore accounts and shell companies, further proof of the family's illegal activities. Each discovery felt like a victory, a blow against the injustice that had upended my life. My role evolved from a betrayed wife to a crusader for truth. And with each passing day, my resolve hardened. This phase of my journey was not just about personal revenge. It was about justice. It was about shining a light on the dark corners of Ted's family legacy and holding them accountable for their actions. The more I discovered, the more determined I became to see this through, to stand up against the powerful forces that had so casually dismissed my existence and exploited my trust. As the evidence mounted, I prepared for the next phase of my plan. Armed with irrefutable proof, I was ready to strike at the heart of the empire, to expose the lies and bring about the downfall of a family that had built its fortune on deceit and corruption. With the mound of evidence piling up against Ted and his family, my once faltering spirit now blazed with purpose. The more I uncovered, the more resolute I became. It was no longer just about mending my broken heart. It was about justice, about correcting the scales that had been so unfairly tipped against me. Armed with my findings, I strategized with my private investigator, a grizzled veteran who seemed to have stepped right out of a noir detective novel. "We've got enough here to bury them," he'd say with a grim nod, his eyes sharp behind the smoky haze of his cigarette. Together, we meticulously planned our next steps, each move designed to expose the deceitful web woven by Ted and his kin. Our plan was multifaceted. First, we targeted the financial irregularities. I contacted a forensic accountant who traced the labyrinthine paths of money that flowed like hidden rivers into offshore accounts and shadowy investments. These findings were not just smoke, they were fire, and we intended to use them to burn down the facade of respectability that Ted's family had upheld for so long. Next, we addressed the suspicious circumstances surrounding the untimely death of Ted's uncle. Reaching out to a few determined journalists who specialized in uncovering corporate corruption, we provided them with the evidence that suggested foul play. The story was explosive, a ticking time bomb set to detonate at the EI, heart of Ted's family empire. As we pieced together the public exposure, I felt a strange amalgam of exhilaration and fear. Each step forward was a step into unknown territory, a dance on the precipice of a very steep cliff. But the thought of backing down never crossed my mind. I had come too far and discovered too much to let their sins remain in the shadows. We also prepared a series of leaks to various regulatory bodies. The evidence of tax evasion, fraud, and possibly even money laundering was compiled into concise, irrefutable dossiers. These were not merely anonymous tips, but well-documented allegations that could not be ignored. The final piece of our plan involved a personal confrontation. I would confront Ted and his family, not in the shadows, but in the full light of day, at a family gathering they were known to host annually. It was there that I planned to reveal all that I had learned, to watch as the masks fell away and the truth laid bare their guilt. Each step was carefully orchestrated, like a maestro leading an orchestra to a crescendo. The anticipation of the final reveal was both terrifying and intoxicating. I rehearsed what I would say 1,000 times, each iteration making me stronger, more confident. This was not just revenge. It was retribution. It was a reclaiming of power from those who had used their wealth and influence to oppress and deceive. As the day of reckoning drew near, I felt a resolve that was ironclad. Ted and his family would no longer control the narrative. They would be forced to face the consequences of their actions, and I would be the architect of their undoing. As the day of confrontation approached, I realized that simply presenting the evidence was not enough. I needed an edge, a way to ensure that my voice would be heard and my presence felt undeniably in the midst of Ted's formidable family. Inspired by the indomitable spirit of Katharine Hepburn, known for her fiery independence and sharp wit, I decided to reinvent myself. I would attend the family gathering not just as Mary, the scorned wife, but as a woman reborn with the poise and conviction of a Hollywood legend. This transformation was not just about a physical makeover, although that was certainly part of it. I swapped my usual subdued wardrobe for bold, striking outfits that screamed confidence. I practiced my speech, my gestures, and my expressions in the mirror, channeling Hepburn's unapologetic demeanor and her ability to command attention in any room. But the real change was internal. I worked with a voice coach to hone my speaking skills, ensuring that every word I uttered would be clear, strong, and resonate with the gravity of the truths I was about to reveal. I studied Hepburn's interviews and performances, absorbing not just her style but her essence, her ability to be both formidable and irresistibly charming. The evening of the event, I arrived at the venue, a lavish estate that oozed old money and secrets. As I stepped out of the car, the transformation was complete. I felt every inch the star, not of the silver screen, but of my own story. My heels clicked assertively on the marble floor as I entered the grand hall, where the family gathered, buzzing with oblivious anticipation. The reactions were immediate and palpable. Eyes widened, whispers swirled, and the room's atmosphere thickened with intrigue and a hint of unease. Ted's mother, Helen, approached first, her smile tight and uncertain. "Mary, you look different," she commented, her eyes raking over my transformation. "I feel different," I replied, my voice steady and imbued with a quiet strength. "Tonight is a night for truths, Helen. It's time we all stepped out from behind our masks, don't you think?" As dinner commenced, I could feel the tension simmering beneath the polite conversation and clinking of fine china. I bided my time, allowing the anticipation to build. When the moment felt ripe, just as dessert was served, and the murmur of idle chatter began to swell, I stood commanding the silence with a raised hand and an unwavering gaze. "My dear family," I began, my voice ringing clear and resonant, "I stand before you tonight not just as Mary, but as someone who has come to reveal the unvarnished truth about our esteemed family." The room froze, every eye locked on me, every ear tuned to my words. I proceeded to unveil the deceit, the corruption, and the lies that I had unearthed. With each revelation, I watched as the facades crumbled, as shock, denial, and finally, realization swept through the room. I held nothing back, presenting the evidence with precision and unwavering confidence. As the revelations poured forth, the atmosphere in the grand hall shifted palpably. The initial shock gave way to a chaotic cacophony of denials, accusations, and disbelieving gasps. Ted's face, once composed, now contorted through a spectrum of emotions, anger, fear, and finally, a desperate sort of resignation. I have laid bare tonight not just baseless accusations, but irrefutable evidence. I continued, my voice steady despite the turmoil around me. Documents, transactions, legal records, all meticulously gathered to show not just the depth of deceit, but the breadth of corruption that this family, under the guise of respectability and philanthropy, has perpetuated. One by one, I displayed the evidence on a large screen for all to see. Bank statements, email correspondences, and photographs. each piece contributing to an undeniable narrative of systemic fraud and moral bankruptcy. The room's opulence now seemed grotesque, a gilded cage built on lies. As the evidence unfolded, the family's unity began to fracture. Whispered conversations turned into heated arguments as allies turned into adversaries, each trying to distance themselves from the epicenter of the scandal. Ted's siblings, cousins, and even his father were implicated in various capacities, and as the full extent of the betrayal became clear, old loyalties crumbled. Ted himself tried to speak, to salvage some shred of dignity, or perhaps to deny the undeniable. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice lacking any conviction. "Mary, you're confused, But his words faltered under the weight of the evidence displayed against him. I stood resolute, the chaos around me a stark contrast to the calm fury within. "This is no misunderstanding, Theodore," I addressed, him formally, distancing myself from any remnants of our intimacy. "This is your legacy, and it ends tonight." The journalists I had tipped off prior to the event were now present, cameras and recorders capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. The story I had promised them was delivered in full, a rich tapestry of deceit, unwoven thread by thread in the glare of the public eye. As the evening drew to a close, law enforcement arrived. The evidence I had collected, now publicly corroborated, by confessions and panicked admissions from various family members, was more than enough to initiate arrests and formal investigations. The fallout was immediate and devastating for the family. Ted, his father, and several key members were taken into custody, their futures uncertain, but undoubtedly marred by the looming prospects of trials and potential convictions. The family's assets were frozen, their social standing shattered, and their legacy irreparably tarnished. Standing amidst the ruins of the empire I had helped topple, I felt a complex mixture of triumph and sorrow. The justice I sought was not without its cost, and the satisfaction of vindication was tinged with the melancholy of knowing how deeply I had once loved and trusted Ted. With the truth now exposed, my mission was complete, but my journey was far from over. The next chapter awaited, a chapter of rebuilding and perhaps redemption not just for me, but for those who had suffered under the family's deceitful shadow. As the night of the great revelation faded into the early hours of the morning, the once powerful dynasty began to crumble under the weight of its own deceit. The estate, which had echoed with the sounds of opulence and laughter, now resonated with the somber tones of a fallen empire. Ted and his family, once the pillars of society, were now pariahs, entangled in legal battles and public scrutiny. In the days that followed, the effects of the exposure rippled out far beyond the Grand Hall. The media frenzy was relentless. Every newspaper, television station, and online platform was abuzz with the scandal. Financial fraud and family betrayal. "The downfall of an empire!" the headlines screamed. Interviews with betrayed business partners, defrauded investors, and a betrayed public painted a vivid picture of the consequences of the family's actions. As the legal proceedings began, the scope of the fraud was laid bare in courtrooms packed with journalists and onlookers. The evidence I had uncovered led to multiple charges against Ted and his relatives, ranging from embezzlement and fraud to money laundering and obstruction of justice. Each court session was another nail in the coffin of their social standing, and another vindication of the truth I had fought so hard to unveil. The family's assets were systematically seized and auctioned off. Luxurious cars, sprawling mansions, and expensive artworks, acquired over decades of deceit, were now sold to the highest bidder. The proceeds were earmarked to repay the creditors, and victims, a small but significant consolation to those they had wronged. Meanwhile, Ted's personal downfall was particularly poignant. The man who had walked away from our marriage thinking he could escape the consequences of his actions was now facing the most severe repercussions. The betrayal had not only cost him his freedom but also his reputation, and most of his relationships. His attempts to reach out to me through letters from his prison cell were a testament to his newfound understanding of loss and regret, although they went unanswered. The public reaction was a mix of shock and schadenfreude. Many who had envied the family's success now reveled in their downfall, while others reflected on the dangers of greed and corruption. Community forums and social media were awash with discussions about the need for transparency and ethics in business and personal conduct. For me, the downfall of Ted's family was a bittersweet resolution. While it brought justice and a sense of closure, it also marked the end of a chapter in my life that I had once cherished. The victory was not without its sorrows, as the man I had loved became a reminder of the damage deceit could inflict on lives and hearts. As I watched the empire fall, I realized that my journey through the labyrinth of lies and betrayal had changed me irrevocably. I was no longer the woman who had entered the marriage with hope and love. I was now a survivor, tempered by fire, ready to rebuild from the ashes of my past. With the legal battles winding down and the public's thirst for justice satiated, it was time for me to turn the page. My next steps were uncertain, but I was determined to use the lessons I had learned to help others and to find a new path for myself, one built on honesty and integrity. With the echoes of the empire's collapse still resounding, I found myself at a crossroads. The battles were fought and won, but the war within myself was far from over. I needed purpose, something to fill the void left by years of deception and heartache. As I pondered my next steps, I realized that my experience had equipped me with unique insights into the mechanics of fraud and the devastation it can wreak. It was from this realization that my new mission was born: to help others navigate the aftermath of financial deceit and to advocate for greater transparency and accountability. I started by volunteering at a local nonprofit that provided support to victims of financial crimes. Sharing my story publicly for the first time, I spoke at community centers and participated in workshops, teaching others how to recognize and recover from financial exploitation. The work was cathartic, and it connected me with people who had endured similar betrayals. Together, we formed a network of support and advocacy, pushing for legislative changes that would protect future victims. Encouraged by the impact of these efforts, I decided to formalize my advocacy into a more structured program. I founded a nonprofit organization called New Dawn Recovery, dedicated to providing resources and support to those affected by financial fraud. We offered counseling, legal advice, and financial planning services, all aimed at empowering victims to reclaim their lives and financial independence. The launch of New Dawn was met with enthusiasm and gratitude. Donations poured in from individuals and businesses alike, many of whom had followed my story and wanted to contribute to the cause. The organization quickly grew, and I found myself leading a team of passionate individuals, each driven by personal experiences and a shared commitment to justice. As New Dawn's influence expanded, so did our capabilities. We collaborated with law enforcement agencies and financial institutions to improve fraud prevention strategies and to educate the public about the dangers of financial scams. Our annual conferences brought together experts from various fields, fostering a collaborative environment that spurred innovation in fraud prevention and victim support. Amidst this whirlwind of activity, I also took time to rebuild my personal life. The public nature of my ordeal had left little room for privacy or introspection, but as I emerged from the shadow of my past, I found joy in simpler pleasures. I reconnected with old friends, took up gardening, and even began writing a memoir detailing my journey from betrayal to empowerment. This project was particularly healing, as it allowed me to reflect on my experiences and to share my story on my own terms. Looking back, I marveled at how far I had come. The pain of Ted's betrayal had been transformed into a force for good, driving me to help others and to prevent similar stories from unfolding. While the scars of the past would always be part of me, they no longer defined me. Instead, they were testaments to my resilience and to the transformative power of turning grief into action. As I sat in my garden one crisp morning, pen in hand, and the early sun casting gentle light on my notebook, I felt a profound sense of peace. The world was wide open before me, and I was ready to write the next chapter of a story that was truly my own. As my new beginning took shape and New Dawn flourished, the legal consequences for Ted and his family continued to unfold. the SAO. Trials were lengthy and highly publicized, serving as a stark reminder of the justice system at work. Ted and several family members faced numerous charges that carried significant penalties, and the courtroom became a battleground where the full extent of their deceit was laid bare for all to see. The evidence I had gathered played a crucial role in the proceedings. Each court date brought new revelations, and the testimonies of those betrayed painted a vivid picture of the manipulation and greed that had characterized Ted's actions. The once respected family found themselves embroiled in a scandal that not only decimated their finances, but also their legacy. Ted, who had once held such a commanding presence, now appeared diminished, a shadow of his former self. The weight of his choices was visible in his posture and the hollow look in his eyes. As the trials progressed, he was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The judge handed down a sentence that was both a punishment and a statement. Ted would spend several years in prison, a fate that seemed to finally bring him to the realization of the harm he had caused. His family members, too, faced their own reckonings. Some were sentenced to prison terms, while others struck plea deals that involved hefty fines and community service. The legal ramifications sent shockwaves through their social circles, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and ethical lapses. Throughout this period, I attended every court session, a silent observer in the gallery. Watching the judicial system hold them accountable was a profound experience. It reaffirmed my belief in the rule of law and strengthened my commitment to New Dawn's mission. The public nature of the trials also helped raise awareness about our organization, leading more victims to seek our help and support. The conclusion of the legal saga marked a significant milestone in the community's healing process. It demonstrated that no one, no matter how powerful or well-connected, is above the law. This message resonated deeply with me and with those I worked with, reinforcing the importance of our ongoing efforts to educate and advocate for transparency and integrity in all dealings. As I reflect on these events, I am reminded of the journey I embarked on, not just through the legal system but within myself. From the ashes of my past life, I had risen, not to seek revenge, but to seek justice and to make a difference in the lives of others. The legal consequences faced by Ted and his family were the closing chapters of a saga that had reshaped many lives, including my own. Now, as I focus on the future and continue to build New Dawn, I carry with me the lessons learned from those tumultuous times. I am more determined than ever to help others find their way out of the shadows of deceit and into the light of recovery and renewal.